The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. We are all capable of believing things we know to be untrue. The only check on it is that sooner or later a false belief bumps up against solid reality, usually on a battlefield, wrote George Orwell. It's a quote that opens Mark Jaccard's book, The Citizen's Guide to Climate Success, Overcoming Myths that Hinder Progress. The conversation about energy production in Canada is in transition, and we need to focus on the truth rather than the myths, says Jaccard, the chair and CEO of the BC Utilities Commission. His concerns about truth and myth come as a reversal of political policies led to the freezing or elimination of the carbon tax federally and provincially. Societal interest in climate change is cyclical, says Jaccard, and he continues, so too is political interest. The realities of carbon concentration increases and the impacts of it run headlong into competing political and economic interests. Myths propagated by climate activists and industry public relations campaigns cloud the debate with exaggerations that inhibit meaningful measures to meet climate and economic challenges. I invited Mark Jaccard, the author of The Citizen's Guide to Climate Success, Overcoming Myths that Hinder Progress, and the chair and CEO of the BC Utilities Commission, to join me for a conversation that matters about finding a path to open dialogue and realistic strategies to address our climate challenges. Mark, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Stu.
One of the things that has always impressed me about you is that you are a realist about where we're at in the use of fossil fuels going forward. You don't sit there and just say, nope, at all costs, cut them out. How can you do that? Because you got good, solid, environmental credentials that almost seem to be at odds with the idea that you could accept the use of fossil fuels.
Thanks for that. That's a great opening question, and I really appreciate it. And as a little preamble to answering it, I'll point out, as you mentioned, that I'm now chairing the British Columbia Utilities Commission. And so any statements I'm making are not policies of the Utilities Commission. They're really from me, as you mentioned, as an author of books and a longtime professor in sustainable energy. I'm an economist, and I'm a specialist in energy. And because of that academic position, which I think qualifies me to be a regulator, is I have to be evidence-based. And so it does make you sensitive to things that people say that aren't really well grounded among what the leading researchers are actually finding. But I'll even say that's happened to me throughout my career. So I was someone who was an environmentalist who said, oh, renewables, energy efficiency must be cheap. Renewables must be cheaper than fossil fuels, because I kind of wanted to believe that. Mm-hmm. As I've interacted in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, on the Global Energy Assessment, and in academic editorial boards and reviewing papers, I've just realized, wow, in many cases, energy efficiency is expensive and renewables are expensive. And people maybe can't change their behavior in the ways that we might hope we could, reprogram them. So maybe that's a long-winded answer, but it's a way of saying that it's meant that I find myself at times being very unpopular with industry, and at times I'm very unpopular with environmentalists. And then at the end of the day, though, I'm at an age where I say maybe that was a good place to be.
Well, for a journalist, that's a great place to be. If you've got both sides angry at you, then hopefully you're trying to find somewhere where a workable truth exists.
Yeah.
So when we take a look at the transition and also the unique place that we find ourselves in, not just politically in Canada, but in tensions between Canada and the United States, we're going, okay, we need to do a number of things to make sure that the Canadian economy is secure. The Prime Minister comes out and introduces Bill C-5. Ontario jumps on board with Bill 5. In BC, we've got Bill 14 and 15. Let's ramp up production and move through environmental processes to build, baby, build. And of course, people are going, well, does that mean more pipelines? There are people who say it's a bad thing and other people who say it's a good thing. From your perspective, Which one is it?
Yeah. Well, as I said, maybe I'll end up saying neither, because if you're an energy economist and you look at global energy markets, you realize that if an individual jurisdiction that happens to be endowed with a fossil fuel, let's say oil or gas, stops producing, stops its production, saying, I'm going to help the planet with this huge problem, the evidence is pretty strong that you won't help the planet.
Why not?
Because the Earth's crust is chock-a-block full of fossil fuels, and they're nicely distributed around the planet. And what that means is that if any one jurisdiction voluntarily says, we're not going to develop this, some other jurisdiction will do it. And so you're not reducing greenhouse gas emissions globally if you stop producing just because you happen to be well endowed with that resource. So that's what an energy global trade economist will tell you. That's what dominates the research. I can't find any problems with that research. On the other hand, of course, I understand the sort of panic mode of people to say, oh my goodness, like every day the climate news is worse, and not just the climate effects, but what they tell us about what can come, and we're not doing enough about it. So for heaven's sake, stop expanding, stop building. There's a logic to that as well. But the problem is that's in one jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. And so then you start to say, well, what could you do in that jurisdiction? Well, let's look at leading jurisdictions and what are they doing? They're really making success by reducing their domestic emissions. That's emissions associated with their own generation of electricity, or their own vehicles, or even their trucking, or their buildings, and some aspects of their industry. So I don't say to people, oh, you can't do anything, throw up your arms. I just say, if you think you stop oil pipelines and gas pipelines and you're reducing global emissions, you're probably not.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. So it's one of those jurisdictions that you're looking at, Norway, because as you're talking, I'm going, they're doing all of those things, and yet they produce, well, what they are, the oil pipeline to Europe, especially now that there's the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought up Norway, because I'm always worried. People hear me say Norway all the time, in British Columbia especially, because it is something that really should give us pause. Because if someone tells you, so let's just back up, Norway is so similar to British Columbia. It's a coastal, temperate climate. It has very cold areas, just as we do. And it has about 5 million people as we do. It's a hydroelectric based economy, and they're about the same standard of living. And they have oil and gas resources. So if we include Alberta, we've got all of that. And what they've done is they've kind of taken the argument that I just gave you earlier and said, you know what, if we stop producing oil or stop producing natural gas tomorrow, it won't affect the total global consumption and the emissions therein. So what we will do is we'll still do that, but we'll responsibly we'll push ourselves as an economy. So I hear today in BC, oh, there's no way we can get to a zero emission vehicle fleet. Well, the Norwegian sales now are almost 100%. Now this can include plug-in hybrids. You're still going to burn some gasoline. I don't think you need pure electric or pure hydrogen vehicles, but they're moving rapidly on that. Then someone says, well, with our buildings though, we got to have natural gas for our buildings, or what are we going to do in the winter? And we don't have enough electricity. Well, the Norwegians opted in the 1980s not to put natural gas in their buildings when they had tons of it. And so then they said, we'll make the buildings and we'll mostly run them on electricity, some kinds of district heat and alternative energy sources. So Norway, you brought up Norway, and it's very much an example of what I was just talking about. And it's something that should cause people in British Columbia to pause a little bit and say, wait a minute, we just said we couldn't do that, but they're doing it. So. Well,
not to harp too much on Norway, but I've been there and I've taken a look at energy production there. I've been out to Mongstad. And I interviewed a journalist out there who had chained himself to a tree back when they were building the Mongstad oil refinery, saying, over my dead body. But he was a wildlife documentary filmmaker. 25 years after they had built it, they asked him to come and document the tranquilizing of reindeer that were inside the refinery fence so that they could move the reindeer out into the wilderness where there was a more abundant food supply. And they went, who better? And he came away from there and he went, I was wrong about how we can do this. Right. We can do it responsibly.
Right.
And Norway has demonstrated that. And take a look at the lead that they're showing on carbon capture now.
Stuart, I love this. You know where I would go. Yeah, they are leaders, and they've been doing it for a long time to help develop the technology so that other jurisdictions will one day use it. Absolutely.
So we talk about moving towards an electrified economy. And I have looked at this trilemma that exists, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, because we're interconnected, not just Alberta and British Columbia. We're interconnected with Washington, Oregon, Northern California, Idaho.
11 states.
Yeah, it's an intermix grid.
Yeah.
We produce some hydroelectric. The U.S., especially off the Columbia River system, does. We supply natural gas down into Washington State, where they use that for cogeneration to create electricity, and we're trading that electricity back and forth. And yet, the estimates are that by the time that we get to the end of this decade, there could be 10, 11, 12 days a year where there's not going to be peak load supply. So how, with like the growing need for more and more electricity, are we going to meet that supply?
So now, in my role as chair of the Utilities Commission, I see a lot of evidence. As an academic, I'm always trying to stay on top of evidence. I'm seeing a lot more evidence in the question that you just raised, which is with electrification, aren't we going to run into a period where we don't have enough electricity, and it's going to have dire consequences for our industry, our buildings, maybe even our transportation? And what you look at with jurisdictions, go back to Norway, is okay, they just went quickly to move electrification in. I mean, they did industry a long time ago. They've done buildings decades ago. Now they're doing transportation. And what did they do? They built out more electricity generation that they needed as they did that, which is kind of what most jurisdictions in the world do. Developing countries have trouble, and they have to have blackouts all the time, but any industrialized country moved ahead and built electricity. So at the Utilities Commission in BC Hydro's Integrated Resource Plan, which was the first thing I looked at almost 2 years ago now, they map out, we're going to have to do some calls for power.
Yes.
And they did a call for power. They got more requests to generate power than they needed. They are doing another call for power. We've got Fortis Electric doing a call for power. And the wonderful thing about, so wind and solar, we can talk about their negatives in a minute, and they have some big negatives.
Right.
But the wonderful thing is you can build them really fast.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we look at jurisdictions, those 11 US Western states, they've developed wind and solar very rapidly, while their coal went like this, and their natural gas is stable. And like if you have natural gas plants, but they're not there to run all the time. They're not giving you what we call base load. So
they're on demand power, aren't they?
They're on demand, and they're really to help you with some of those peaks and things like that. So where it is right now, we're lucky with all the hydro reservoirs. We always have enough generating capacity today, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, but we have to be careful in the future, that we can meet peak demand. And that's why in that really cold weather snap we had, was it a year and a half ago?
2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Yeah, I guess a year and a half ago. You're right. Yeah.
So when I looked at the flow charts, because now as the chair, I go to these meetings down in the States where the 11 states and the 2 BC provinces, Alberta, the 2 Canadian provinces, BC and Alberta, and you look at what were the flows during that critical period. BC was providing capacity over to Alberta and to the south of us. So we need to keep building capacity potential.
Yeah.
And hydro's going to put out a call for that. But for someone to say, oh, we now know that 8 years from now we won't have enough capacity is to me, there's something wrong with them saying that. They must have some other motive, because you can always say that in the system. You're always building for growth, and
Yeah.
we're having more dramatic growth, so we have to build faster.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. I guess the thing that I got out of the panel that I had done with this is, okay, we're seeing the demand side increase dramatically. And it's not just EVs, it's AI, cryptocurrency, and then the electrification of so many other elements of our lives.
Yes.
That demand is growing faster than our current projected increases in production. So how, and in British Columbia in particular, do we meet that increase? And I know that we're talking wind and solar, but do we not need more hydroelectric, or are we tapped out there?
Yes and no, you don't need more hydroelectric. What you need is the mix of resources that will give you the sufficient amount of energy, that's the kilowatt hours, like you see on your bill, and the capacity, that's kilowatts, that's or megawatts or gigawatts. It's the ability to produce at that peak time. And so again, and I did watch the panel that you're referring to, and I'm really glad you've put me on the show here. And I invite you to put BC Hydro's CEO or chair, and maybe you've already done that, because
I'm more than happy to do that.
yeah. So well, I mean, that's for you to figure out. But do give people a chance to respond to that, because if you look at other jurisdictions that are decarbonizing, and maybe we're decarbonizing too fast, I don't know, that's a separate debate, but a lot of the things that we're trying to do, we can get that capacity, and that's what we're on the path of doing. That's what the Utility Commission wants to see happen. It wants reliable electricity, and that is what BC Hydro wants to do, and it's what Fortis Electric is trying to do as well.
I know the BC Hydro is about to decommission two power generations that are driven by natural gas. Is now the time to be doing that?
You know, I know which two you're referring to.
Yeah.
And I know there are specifics about age of the equipment and whether you can just say, oh, keep them running, or you actually have to invest a lot of money to keep those running. So the Gordon Campbell government in January 2007, whose Minister of Environment was Barry Penner, Barry Penner phoned me up because I'd been helping him as an independent academic and helping the Campbell government with its climate policy. And he was so excited that the cabinet had agreed that they wouldn't be building natural gas plants, that they canceled the Duke Point plant, the 600 megawatt they were going to build. They once and for all said, we're not going to Burrard Thermal Plant. We're not going to keep it operating. We're not going to invest the extra money to keep it operating. And they also canceled two coal-fired power plants, one that would be in Princeton and one up in Taylor. And Barry Penner had a big role in that. Gordon Campbell was the premier. Carol Taylor was probably the finance minister, and it was a jubilant time. And since then, we have had enough electricity. So we're talking 20 years where we've built enough to have the electricity that we need.
So what's your biggest myth concern about our ability to transition to a more electrified economy? Like, what's the biggest one that causes you concern about the debate that happens in British Columbia right now?
Oh, I think that there's certain interests that seem to want to slow walk the climate effort. And I'll tell you what I mean by the word slow walk. And one day I would invite you to bring on your show Katja Rhodes. She's a professor at the University of Victoria. There are more and more academics now who are sort of in economics and political science and policy, and they're interested in how are people able to, why are we failing on climate? Do people still say, oh, I don't believe the climate science? There's a few people, but now the more dominant approach is to say, I believe in climate science, but this is going too fast. We won't have enough electricity. It won't be affordable for low-income people. It'll hurt marginalized people. It will involve other negative impacts. All of those are potentially true. You have to, you know, no solution in energy comes without costs. And so what I see right now is a very concerted effort. And I invite you as an interviewer to always pressure people and say, who do you represent? Who's funding you? And tell us all your funds. And because we note you consistently come out and say, oh no, we can't cook with electricity. We have to have natural gas. We have to have natural gas for heating. We have to have gasoline in our cars and trucks. And there are jurisdictions in the world that are moving rapidly away from that. And so that's where I'm a little more with the environmentalists, because I'm saying, who are the financial interests that are trying to slow this down? That being said, there can be reasons to slow down certain policies. So I'm not arguing against that per se.
Well, we always come up against that rub about, well, how quickly can we develop the technological ability to give us the output that we want and make it work economically, politically, environmentally? Like, there is a rub there. I mean, that trilemma exists because we want affordability, we want reliability, we want sustainability. Do we have to have some flexibility in saying, okay, let's just not make hard deadlines, but let's work towards a goal that gives us flexibility so that we don't throw up our hands and go, see, it didn't work?
We certainly did that from like 1989 to about 2000. We did that for 20 years. We had voluntary this, voluntary that. We had no targets. We had no real policies that had bite, that were regulatory. And what we found was that just the general growth of economies and the wonders of fossil fuels, because they're so cheap to get our energy services, meant that we made no progress on climate. Yeah. Jurisdictions have started to make progress now because they've done the more difficult stuff. And so when someone comes to me, or I read about them, or maybe you do an interview with them and they tell you, oh, we're going too fast, let's make it a little more flexible. Ask them, okay, and what does this mean for our greenhouse gas emissions? You've hopefully calculated that, because you do understand every jurisdiction has to be working to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. Do they go down or do they go up, if we take your slow walk advice?
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. I was doing some research about, up until about the early 1700s, the major source of energy was the burning of biomass.
Yep.
Trees, grass, you name it.
Animal dung.
And then there was a blacksmith in England who threw some coal into his fire one day and went, whoa, this works well.
Right.
It took 100 years before coal became the #1 source of energy, surpassing biomass. But biomass use didn't stop. It kept growing too. Around the same time that coal became the #1 source of energy, oil was discovered. It took 60 to 70 years before oil surpassed coal. And going back to the 1990s, when we really started to invest in electricity, like oil, gas, biomass use all kept increasing, but they're still all increasing. Can electricity, or our move towards electricity, help to offset the growth of these other forms of energy?
Yeah, so I think that's a legitimate question. You're almost hearkening back to my book 20 years ago, which did well and won the Donner Prize in Canada, called Sustainable Fossil Fuels, where I do a lot more of tracking energy. One of the things that us academics will be a little picky about is electricity is a secondary form of energy. So we say, what were the primary energies? So electricity, hydrogen, they're secondary forms, heat. The primary energy is, yes, a biomass, a wood, all those other things, straw, and so on. And then, yes, to coal. But of course, you mentioned England. I'll correct the history a little bit. Coal was extensively used in Beijing 2,000 years ago.
Wow.
And regulations about coal use were done a very long time ago, but this was coal just for heating, but even for blacksmithing, I think. So yes, but those kinds of transitions can happen faster and faster. You want to look on this, how natural gas started and then grew. Yeah. So to say that a writer who I respect greatly is Vaclav Smil,
yes.
and he always points out how difficult it is to transition our energy system. Using some of the examples you gave, I critique him in the book you've just mentioned, the latest book, The Citizen's Guide, because he never talks about the cases where people did it really fast.
Right.
where like the French went from coal-fired electricity to nuclear electricity in about 18 years, the entire system, where Ontario shut down 25% of its electricity system in 10 years, all the coal plants, where Denmark did that. So there are, and you just mentioned Norway with vehicles and so on, there are cases where we do go really fast. And when it comes to climate, I don't think we should just keep looking at the cases where we went slow. And I'm not saying you're saying that, but some people are.
So one of the things that I think is a really important point to make, as you say, in other jurisdictions, they're going to continue to consume, and if they can't get it from us, they're going to get it from somewhere else. What role do our environmental standards in the production of oil and gas play in helping other jurisdictions who are still going to buy fossil fuels mitigate or reduce their GHG outputs?
Yeah, so there's I'll try to be brief. As I understand your question, there are people arguing that we should be exporting oil and gas to the rest of the world because maybe we produce it with less emissions, not really for oil, but maybe gas, and they'll use it to supplant coal or some even dirtier fuel, and so that's why we should export. And I don't think there's a lot of evidence to support that. That seems like a really self-serving. So if you look at if you put together the 50 top energy economist analysts in the world, I couldn't think more than 2 or 3 might say that's possible. But on the other hand, the argument I gave you earlier, which is, so we shouldn't export at all because because we're going to
save the planet.
We're going to save the planet, and that one doesn't work either, as I mentioned earlier, because the fuel will come from somewhere else. So those are the positions that I think I can safely say that leading experts would agree, and the other ones tend to have some self-serving side to them.
I think your book is a good guide for people who are trying to find a balanced way of looking at these issues, which are complex and challenging. Thanks for coming in and giving us a snapshot of it.
Stu, I really enjoyed it, and I loved your questions. Thanks very much.